The universe had a funny way of demoting you. One minute you were Sergeant Kel Riley, decorated for valor, and the next you were just Corporal Riley, a cautionary tale with a dangerously soft heart. Now, as the engines of the evac shuttle Last Ditch screamed a promise of escape from the godforsaken moon of Iridani B5, he was just another piece of cargo being shoved up the ramp. The air was thick with the grit of pulverized rock, a taste of metal and superheated ceramic that clung to the back of his throat. Medics were shouting, officers were barking, and Cale was just trying to keep pressure on the gash in his arm. The tacky seal of the biofoam, a cold, tight feeling on his skin. That's when he saw her. Propped against a slag boulder that shimmered with residual heat was a Vardon warrior, her segmented armor scorched and fractured. Her legs were bent at an angle that defied anatomy, a gruesome stillness in the chaotic retreat. A Vardon honor guard, 3 of them, stood ramrod straight, each giving her a crisp final salute by striking their chest plates with a closed fist. The sound was like hammers on an anvil, that sharp, resonant clang that cut through the engine whine. They weren't helping her. They were saying goodbye. Cale paused on the ramp, his boots magnetized to the vibrating metal. He caught the tail end of a conversation between a harried-looking human officer and one of the Vardons. "It's all we, Lieutenant," the Vardon said, his voice a low rumble devoid of emotion. "She is gloriously spent. Her service is complete." The human officer, a man whose face was a roadmap of exhaustion, scrubbed a hand over his jaw, the rasp of his stumble audible. I know. Regulations dictate we don't interfere. An incident with the Vardon Empire is the last thing the Coalition needs right now." He glanced at the warrior, a flicker of pity, or maybe just weary resignation, in his eyes. "She meets her end with honor." Honor. The word tasted like ash in Cale's mouth. He looked from the paralyzed legionnaire to the closing shuttle ramp. He saw the cold, hard logic of military pragmatism and alien tradition converging to leave a soldier behind. His jaw clenched. "Like hell," he muttered, the words a low vibration in his own chest. The officer shot him a glare. "What was that, Corporal?" "I said, with all due respect, sir, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." Cale said, his voice rising, loud enough to carry over the engine whine. The Vardon honor guard turned his head slowly, his grid-like pupils narrowing in dismissive slits. "You dare insult the path of glory, human." "I'm not insulting a path," Cale shot back, taking a deliberate step down the ramp, his boots releasing from the magnetic plate with a soft click. "I'm saying leaving her to die is a waste." "Her sacrifice is not for you to understand or to tarnish with your sentiment," the Vardon hissed. "Corporal Riley, get your ass on this shuttle now! That is a direct order!" The lieutenant barked, his face flushing with anger as he pointed a trembling finger at him. Cale looked at the lieutenant, then at the Vardon warrior whose head was bowed, a statue of acceptance. He thought of his demotion, of the griever children he'd pulled from a collapsing building while his squad sergeant screamed about holding the line. He had been told then that his sentimentality was a liability, a weakness. Maybe it was. He gave the lieutenant a wry, unapologetic grin. "Sorry, sir. Seems I have a problem with direct orders." With that, he turned, shouldered past the stunned Vardon, and jumped. He landed with a jarring thud on the dusty ground just as the hydraulic locks of the ramp hissed shut. The magnetic field disengaged with a heavy, final clunk. The shuttle's engines built to a deafening roar, kicking up a blinding, choking storm of gray dust that sandpapered his exposed skin. Cale shielded his eyes, watching his only ride home ascend into the bruised purple sky. The noise faded, swallowed by the vast emptiness, replaced by a profound, unnerving silence. silence. The only sound left was the thin, lonely whistle of the wind moving through the rocks. He was alone. Well, not entirely. The quiet pressed in, punctuated only by the whisper of the wind. When the dust finally settled, drifting like a ghostly shroud over the battlefield, the Vardon legionnaire lifted her head. Her eyes, dark and fiercely intelligent, pinned him with a look of pure, unadulterated fury. "What?" she said, her voice a low, guttural rasp, tight with a rage so controlled it was more terrifying than any shout. "Have you done, human?" I believe the technical term is missed my flight," Kel said, wincing as he prodded the gash on his arm. It was sealed, but the muscle beneath throbbed with a deep, insistent ache. "You have not missed your flight," she snarled, each word distinct and sharp as flaked obsidian. "You have interfered. You have trespassed upon my sacred right. You have stolen my honor." "Right, your honor," Kel said, walking toward her, his boots crunching on the gravelly surface. He stomped a few feet away, taking in the full, grim picture. "Let me see if I got this straight. You get your legs turned into soup, so your buddies give you a pat on the back and leave you here to get eaten by moon scavengers or die of thirst. That's the glorious plan." "It is my path, my end." Her voice was a low growl, and she tested the dead weight of her legs, a futile, infuriating motion against the unyielding ground. He saw the tremor of frustration in her shoulders. "It was earned in a righteous fury, saving my clan sisters from a griever ambush. It was a good death." It wasn't a death at all," he countered. He deliberately kicked a loose stone, the sound sharp and intrusive in the silence. "It was a prelude. Death is the quiet part. This is just waiting. And I'm sorry, but leaving a soldier behind, any soldier, isn't honorable. It's just dumb." She stared at him, the plates of her jaw clattering in a gesture of profound agitation, a rapid sound of disgust. "You are a soft-shelled, sentimental child. You understand nothing of my people, of our strength." "And you understand nothing of mine," Kel retorted. "We have a say. No one gets left behind. It's not as poetic as your thing, but it's a hell of a lot more practical." He knelt, his gaze clinical as he assessed her ruined armor. "Can you feel them?" he asked, his voice softer. Her expression was stone. "No." "Right." Kel scrubbed a hand over his short, cropped hair, dislodging a cloud of fine dust. "Okay, so first things first. We need to get you somewhere safe. A scanner shows an old survey bunker about 2 clicks east of here. Should be shielded, pressurized too if we're lucky." She laughed, a harsh, grating sound that held no humor, only contempt. "Get me somewhere. Look at me, you fool. I'm anchored to this rock. Leave me. Find a hole and wait for the grievers to finish the job. It's the only tactically sound option you have left." "Yeah, I'm not much for tactically sound," Kel said, his eyes already scanning the debris field, looking for anything useful. His gaze landed on a large, flat-bottomed cargo dolly, its anti-grav unit a fried husk, but its frame mostly intact. "Perfect." He dragged the heavy dolly over, its metal feet scraping, a protest against the rock. "All right, Legionnaire. We're gonna have to get you out of some of that armor. It's too heavy, and I need to get a look at the damage." Her eyes widened in alarm, a flash of vulnerability she quickly masked. "You will not touch me." "Look, I'm not thrilled about it either," he grunted, bracing himself. "But that armor probably weighs more than I do, and I can't drag you 2 clicks in it. So either you help me figure out the latches, or I start prying things off with a rock. Your call." For a long, tense moment, she just stared, her fury wrestling with the cold, hard logic of her situation. He could see the battle in the tight line of her jaw. Finally, with a sound of utter disgust, a low hiss from the back of her throat, she spoke.
The primary release for the plastron is located below the clavicular ridge, a triple redundant magnetic clasp. It requires a counterpressure sequence.
The process was grueling and intimate. The clasps were stubborn, jammed with grit and warped by heat. Each piece of armor he removed felt like a transgression. He worked with a detached professionalism, focusing on the mechanisms, trying to ignore the pained hisses when a piece shifted unexpectedly, and the sheer vulnerability of the warrior beneath. The air filled with the scent of his sweat and the faint, coppery smell of her blood. When he finally unlatched the leg armor, the sight was grim. He saw her watch his hands, her expression unreadable. Without conscious thought, his hands moved to apply emergency tourniquets, his fingers finding the right pressure points, cinching scavenge straps with a deftness learned in a dozen other firefights. He quickly covered her with a spare thermal blanket he pulled from his pack. He managed to leverage her onto the cargo dolly, a process that involved more grunting, sweating, and muttered apologies than he cared to admit. He fashioned a harness from cargo straps and began to pull. The dolly scraped and groaned across the rocky terrain. The 2 kilometers to the bunker felt like 100. Kel leaned into the harness, his muscles screaming, the thin atmosphere of Eridani B5 making every breath a sharp, cold chore. Behind him, the Verdon warrior was silent, a rigid, blanket-wrapped figure of judgment. Her silence was louder than any insult she could have thrown at him. It was the long, cold silence of a woman whose honorable death had just been rudely and stupidly interrupted. The first 24 hours in the survey bunker were a masterclass in weaponized silence. The bunker itself was a small mercy, a cramped, functional space with a working air filter, a water reclamation unit, and nutrient paste dispensers. It was a gray metal box. The metal walls were perpetually cold and slick with a faint condensation, and the recycled air left a constant metallic film on the tongue. Saren, who had settled onto a cot in the corner, had erected a wall of contempt, so thick he could have chipped it with a hammer. Their arguments were short, sharp, and brutal. Tiny explosions in the oppressive quiet.
"You are filtering the water through a secondary membrane without backflushing the primary,"
she stated, her voice flat as he worked the reclamation unit. She tracked his every move with critical eyes.
"A first-year cadet would know better. You will poison us with your mineral buildup."
"Noted," Kel said through gritted teeth, slapping the reverse flow switch. The pump shuddered in protest.
"Thanks for the tip."
Later, as he was trying to coax a signal from the bunker's long-range comms unit, her voice cut through the static he was generating.
"Your methodology is inefficient. You're cycling through broad-spectrum frequencies like a child searching for a toy. You should be targeting coalition emergency bands using subspace entangled burst transmissions."
"Yeah, well, this inefficient method is the only one I know." He snapped back, slapping the side of the console in frustration. The metal rang with the impact. "Unless you want to crawl over here and do it yourself." The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. The silence that followed was glacial, colder than the walls. He glanced over. She was staring at the opposite wall, her jaw tight, a muscle feathering along its line. "Sorry," he mumbled, turning back to the console, his ears burning. "That was uncalled for." She didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge he had spoken. He retreated to his corner, defeated, and pulled out his datapad. He found his old Earth Anthems playlist jacked into the bunker's internal speakers and filled the oppressive quiet with the thunderous, chaotic glory of AC/DC. Saren flinched as the opening riff of Thunderstruck blasted through the small room, the vibrations thrumming through the floor.
"What is that auditory assault?"
she demanded, her voice rising to be heard. "It's called music," Kel said, turning it up a notch with a defiant jab of his thumb. "It's for morale."
It sounds like a power conduit failing during the phase core explosion.
That's the best part, he shouted over the music, a wild grin on his face. She glared at him, a new kind of fire in her eyes.
You are without question the most irritating, soft-shelled simpleton I have ever had the misfortune to encounter.
He just grinned and hummed along a small, petty victory in their war of attrition. He needed the noise to drown out the silence, to drown out the thought of how utterly screwed they were. That night, when she thought he was asleep, he saw her activate a small personal device she'd retrieved from a pouch on her belt. A faint, holographic interface shimmered in the dark, casting a pale blue light on her focused face. He couldn't see what she was typing, but he could hear the soft, rhythmic clicks of her claws on the interface. Her voice, a quiet whisper, reached him across the small room. A log entry. Day 1. Subject, human Corporal Kel Riley. Aberrant behavior noted. Displays excessive sentimentality and poor tactical discipline. He compromised my honorable death for reasons I cannot ascertain. His methods are crude, his hygiene questionable, and his taste in acoustic vibrations is an offense to the very concept of sound. Survival probability? Marginal. Kel closed his eyes, a small, weary smile touching his lips. He was getting to her. The next few days settled into a tense, grinding routine. He would scavenge for supplies, venturing out into the gray desolation. She would remain on her cot, a silent, disapproving observer of his comings and goings. Her immobility was a tangible presence in the room, a source of raw, unspoken frustration for them both. She hated being helpless, and he hated seeing her that way. Her pride was a physical thing, a barrier as real as the bunker's hatch. On the 4th day, Kel returned from a fruitless search, covered in dust and frustration. He looked at her, lying still on the cot, and then at the pile of junk he had been accumulating in one corner. An idea sparked. It was a stupid, reckless, probably not going to work idea. His favorite kind. I'm going to build you something, he announced, striding over to a scrap pile. He hefted a greasy hydraulic actuator from a wrecked cargo lifter he had found half buried in a crater. Saren looked at the heap of mangled parts. You're going to build a pile of scrap metal. You have already accomplished this with stunning success. Hilarious,
Kel said, pulling out a plasma torch and a set of diagnostic tools.
The familiar weight of them in his hands was a comfort. I'm going to build you a chair. A walking chair. For the next 2 days, the bunker was filled with the sounds of his work, the sharp hiss of the torch melting metal, the high-pitched whine of a power wrench, the percussive clang of his mismatched parts being hammered into place, and a steady stream of creative cursing from Kel as he burned his fingers or stripped a bolt. He hummed Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song under his breath, the driving, primal rhythm, a counterpoint to the chaos of his creation. He worked with the frantic, focused energy of a man possessed. This was his element. He wasn't a soldier who followed orders. He was a scrapper who saw potential in junk, a puzzle solver who could make dead tech sing. He wired the cargo lifter's hydraulic legs to the command seat of a survey drone, jury-rigging a power cell from a crashed probe and a surprisingly intact motor control unit. It was a Frankenstein's monster of engineering, held together with welds, prayers, and stubbornness. The final product was a monstrosity. It was a high-backed chair perched atop 4 clunky, mismatched legs, trailing a messy umbilical of cables and exposed power conduits. It looked less like a mobility aid and more like something that would chase you in a nightmare. Behold, Kel said, wiping grease from his hands onto his already stained trousers. He presented it with a flourish. The beast. Saren stared at it, her expression one of utter disbelief. That is not a beast. That is a monstrous preambulator.
It is an insult to the principles of engineering and an affront to the eyes.
Well, this insult is your new ride, he said, gesturing to it. Hop in.
I will not be seen in that thing, she said, her voice laced with venom.
What? You have a reputation to uphold here on the Deadsville Five? The local dust mite's going to gossip? He goaded, leaning against his creation. Come on, Legionnaire. What's the matter? Afraid you can't handle it?
He saw the flicker in her eyes. It was a direct challenge to her skill, her control, her pride. The same pride that made her want to die on that rock. Wouldn't let it stand. With a deep sigh of resignation, a dry rasp like stone scraping stone, she allowed him to help her into the seat. It was a clumsy, awkward process that involved a lot of careful lifting and strained muscles on his part. But once she was strapped in, her hands found the drone's control sticks as if they were born to hold them. Her fingers, long and clawed, wrapped around the grips with authority. She powered it on. The hydraulics hissed to life, and the chair lurched violently, nearly toppling over.
Oh, easy does it,
Kel said, his hands hovering, ready to catch her.
Silence,
she commanded, her eyes closed for a moment. He could see her tensing, her entire body focused. He could almost feel her mind mapping the machine, learning its balance points, its flaws, its potential. She opened her eyes. Her fingers moved across the controls, no longer hesitant, each touch a deliberate command. The chair lurched again, then stabilized. She took a hesitant step, the metal leg planting itself with a heavy, resonating thud. Then another, and another. The movements were jerky, unstable, a drunkard's walk. But she didn't fall. She began to compensate. He watched in awe as her warrior's mind went to work. Her innate tactical sense was recalibrating, learning the rig's flawed response times, turning its instability into a variable she could predict and command. Within 10 minutes, she was striding along in the small bunker, the heavy thud-thud-thud of the legs, a new, powerful rhythm in her shared space. She moved with a frightening, focused grace, making his junk heap creation an extension of her own indomitable will. She stopped directly in front of him, the head of the chair level with his own. For the first time since he had met her, he saw something other than fury or contempt in his eyes. It was a crack in the armor, a glint of grudging, astonished respect. The response time on the lateral servos is substandard, she said, her voice still critical, but lacking its usual venomous bite. But it will suffice. Kel couldn't help the wide, triumphant, exhausted grin that spread across his face.
Told you I was a genius.
She just snorted a sharp, percussive sound that was almost a laugh and turned stomping over the comms console. Now, she said, her fingers flying over the controls with renewed purpose, let us try your inefficient way, but with proper calibration. The explosion was not a sound, but a feeling, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated up through the rock, through the metal floor of the bunker, and into the marrow of their bones. The lights flickered violently, then died, plunging them into absolute disorienting darkness. The emergency power kicked in a second later, casting the room in a dim, pulsing blood-red glow.
What was that?
Kel asked, his hand instinctively going to the pistol at his hip, his eyes straining to adjust the crimson gloom. Saren was already manipulating controls of her rig, which she had hard-lined into the bunker's main console. The main screen flickered to life, displaying a cascade of distorted, angry red data. Seismic event. Epicenter approximately 50 clicks north. Not natural. Her fingers moved with a swift, sure economy over the interface. It has the energy signature of a deep core detonation.
Grievers,
he asked, the name a curse. Likely, she said, her voice tight. They're digging for something. The shared fear was a new kind of intimacy. The red light painted her sharp alien features in demonic shades, but her focus was absolute, a beacon of calm in the sudden chaos. In that moment, they weren't human and Varden. They were just two soldiers in the dark, facing a common enemy. "Why did you stay?" she asked, her voice suddenly quiet. Her gaze was fixed on the screen, but the question was aimed directly at him. Kel leaned against the wall, the metal cold and solid against his back. It was a grounding sensation.
"I told you, we don't leave people behind."
"That is a slogan, not a reason," she countered, not looking away from her data. "Many of your species would have followed their orders. They would have called it pragmatism, duty. You disobeyed direct order from a superior officer and abandoned your post. Why?" He was silent for a long moment, the low hum of the emergency power filling the space between them. He looked down at his own hands, at the calluses and grease stains.
"I was demoted a month ago," he said, his voice low. "We were clearing a Griever-held city on Veritas Colony. Brass ordered a tactical bombardment to soften up the central district, but our long-range scans were picking up heat signatures, not combatants. Mostly elderly and children holed up in a civic center." He traced a seam on the floor with his boot. "My CO said they were acceptable losses, a regrettable but necessary cost. I was ordered to hold my position, provide targeting data. I couldn't. I broke formation, got my fire team to help me pull as many as we could out of the building before the shells hit. We saved about 30 of them."
"A noble if reckless act," Saren observed, her voice neutral.
"My sergeant didn't think so," Kel said with a humorless laugh. "He said I wasted military resources, endangered my squad, and showed misplaced, dangerously soft-hearted sentimentality. Said I treated the enemy like they were people." He finally looked up, meeting her gaze in the crimson light. "So, when I saw them leaving you, leaving another soldier to be written off as an unacceptable loss because of some tradition, it felt the same. I guess I stayed because I saw people doing to you exactly what my own command did to me, treating you like you were disposable, deciding your life was over because you were no longer useful in the way they wanted you to be."
Saren was quiet, processing his words. The red light softened the hard lines in her face. "The path of glory is not about being disposable," she said softly, turning her rig slightly to face him more directly. "It is about release. Release from the fear of becoming a burden. In my culture, a warrior's value is in their strength, their ability to protect the clan. To be crippled is to be a drain on resources. A mouth that cannot hunt, a shield that can not be raised. The path allows us to transform that shame into a final, glorious act. It is a mercy."
"Mercy is a choice," Kel said, pushing off the wall. "It shouldn't be an obligation forced on you."
She turned her head, her dark eyes meeting his across the red-lit room. "Perhaps," she murmured, "perhaps you are not a simpleton, merely a different kind of fool." He smiled, a genuine, tired smile.
"I'll take it."
They woke up, not to the red of the emergency lights, but to a green, sickly glow filtering through the bunker's main viewport. It was a nauseating, unnatural color, like phosphorescent decay, and it pulsed with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Kel was the first to the viewport, his boots silent on the metal floor.
"What the hell?"
he breathed. He wiped the condensation from the thick plasteel. The moon's familiar gray, dusty landscape was gone. In its place, the ground was being overtaken by a carpet of pulsating alien flora. Fleshy fungi in shades of electric green and virulent purple had erupted from the rock, their surfaces slick with a fluid that refracted the dim light. They pulsed with a faint internal rhythm. The air outside, visible even through the port, wavered with a haze of green spores. The air inside, thin and sharp in his lungs, even with the filters, tasted of superheated minerals and the damp, sickly sweet rot of a new world being born. Saren stomped over in her rig, her metal feet thudding heavily. She stared out, her expression grim. "The air," she said, her eyes locked on an external atmospheric sensor readout on her console. "The composition is changing. Nitrogen and oxygen levels are plummeting. Methane and ammonia are rising." Kel could taste it, even through the bunker's filters, a sharp metallic tang on the back of his tongue, like licking a battery. A low, high-pitched hum seemed to vibrate through the very rock beneath their feet, a constant, nerve-jangling thrum that set his teeth on edge. "They're terraforming," Kel said, a cold dread seeping into him, chilling him more than the bunker walls. "No," Saren corrected, her tactical mind instantly analyzing the data, her voice sharp and certain. "This is not terraforming. This is erasure. They are rewriting the environment at a molecular level, making it fundamentally toxic to carbon-based life that relies on oxygen. We need intel," Saren stated, her voice all business. She had her rig hardlined into the bunker's main console, turning their cramped shelter into a makeshift command center. Wires snaked across the floor from her chair to the main terminal. "I need to know the source of that energy reading, and I need eyes on the ground to correlate this biological contamination." "I'll go," Kel said without hesitation, already checking his rifle and grabbing his rebreather. "You will be my probe," Saren instructed, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I will be your eyes in the sky. Your comm is linked to my console. I will have access to your vitals, your suit's atmospheric sensors, and your helmet cam. Do not deviate from the path I set. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Your primary objective is reconnaissance. Am I clear, Corporal?" "Crystal, Commander," Kel quipped, the corner of his mouth ticking up as he pulled on his helmet. Her reflection, distorted and imperious in her command chair, stared back at him from his visor. "Try not to get me killed." "A tempting offer," she retorted, a ghost of dry wit in her voice. "But you are currently my most valuable, if only, asset. I will endeavor to keep you functional." The moment he stepped outside, the world assaulted his senses. The hum was louder now, a physical presence that resonated in his chest. The air smelled thick and cloying, like rot and something metallic and alien. The new flora squelched under his boots, releasing puffs of oily green spores that clung out to his visor like dust. "Report," Saren's voice crackled in his ear, crisp and clear, a welcome anchor in the madness. "It's a party out here, Ren," he said, panning his helmet cam around. The spongy ground gave way slightly under his weight. The plants seemed to react to my proximity, pulsing brighter. "Noted. I'm cross-referencing the growth patterns with the energy readings. They're linked. The flora is drawing power directly from the source. Proceed bearing 0905. There is a ridge 200 meters ahead. I need a look at the valley beyond." They fell into a rhythm, a deadly kind of dance between scout and operator. Her voice was a calm, steady presence in his ear, guiding him through the treacherous, shifting landscape. "Ravine ahead, Kel. 10 meters deep. Too wide to jump. Skirt left. There's a rock ridge 80 meters along." "Copy that. Moving left." He felt a strange sense of trust, putting his life in the hands of the woman who, days ago, had wished him gone. "Wait. Motion detected. 2 o'clock behind the green bulbous thing." Kel froze, raising his rifle, his breathing suddenly loud in his own ears. He saw it, the glint of metal, the telltale multi-jointed legs of a Griever Scout drone. "I see it," he whispered, his heart thumping a heavy rhythm against his ribs. "Looks like a standard patrol unit." "Do not engage," she ordered coolly. "It is on a predictable patrol pattern. I am mapping it now. Give me a moment." "Now, move. You have a 12-second window before it cycles back." He sprinted, his lungs burning, the spongy ground sucking at his boots and trying to still his momentum. He dove behind a rock outcropping just as Saren said clear. He leaned against the rock, panting, the adrenaline making him shaky. "You know," he said, catching his breath, "for someone who wanted me to leave you to die, you're pretty good at keeping me alive." There was a half-second of static on the comms. "Your continued survival is tactically advantageous," she said, her tone meticulously unreadable. "Now stop wasting oxygen and get to that ridge." From the top of the ridge, Kel saw it, and the sight made the blood run cold in his veins.
In the center of the valley, where the seismic event had originated, stood a massive black spire. It was a spike of obsidian-like griever metal, easily a kilometer high, humming with a sickly green energy that pulsed in time with the alien plants around it. Arcs of iridian lightning leaped from its peak to the valley floor. It had drilled deep into the moon's crust, a monstrous parasite sucking the life from the world and replacing it with its own poison. "Ren, you seeing this?" He breathed, his helmet gown focused on the structure, feeling utterly dwarfed by its scale. "I see it." Her voice was grim. "The energy readings are off the scale. It's drawing power directly from the moon's molten core. The efficiency is terrifying." She went quiet for a moment. The only sound, the soft, frantic clicking of her working the console. "Kale, I'm analyzing the atmospheric data you're feeding me. The rate of change is accelerating exponentially. The atmospheric composition is shifting to a methane-ammonia base, lethal to both our species. The grievers breathe a nitrogen-heavy mix. They couldn't survive here either." "So what's the point?" Kel asked, watching one of the energy arcs vaporize a boulder. "It's a test," Saren said, the chilling realization dawning in her voice. "A fully automated field test of a planetary denial weapon. They point it at a planet or a moon, and it turns the entire biosphere into a toxic wasteland for their enemies. The detonation we felt? That was the device anchoring to the core." A new cascade of numbers scrolled across Saren's screen. Her intake of breath was sharp, audible over the comm. "Kale," she said, her voice dangerously calm, stripped of all emotion. "Based on the current rate of atmospheric conversion and the energy output of that spire, this entire moon will be biochemically inert and uninhabitable for any coalition species in less than 72 hours. The countdown had begun. Back in the bunker, the mood was dire. The sickly green glow from outside pulsed relentlessly, a constant, silent reminder of the clock ticking down on their lives. "We can't escape," Kel said, pacing the small space, his steps agitated. "Comms are still dead and nobody's coming for us." "Then we will not escape," Saren said, her focus absolute. She had a schematic displayed on the main screen, a complex holographic diagram she had managed to pull from a salvaged griever datapad Kel had found near the spire. "But we will not die waiting." She pointed a clawed finger at the glowing heart of the schematic. "This is the spire's power core. It's a masterpiece of barely contained energies, but it has a flaw. An archaic manual override system, likely designed for emergency shutdowns during the initial setup." "So we shut it down," Kel said, hope flaring. "No," she corrected, her tone sharp. "We do not shut it down. A shutdown sequence is gradual, controlled. It would not create a significant enough energy backlash. We must overload it, force the core into a catastrophic, uncontrolled failure. The resulting feedback pulse would be massive, propagating through subspace. It would not only corrupt and destroy the Grievous's data, it would be the loudest distress beacon in the entire sector. It would scream for help." "Okay, I'm a fan of screaming for help," Kel said, leaning in to look at the schematic. "What's the catch?" "The catch," she said, zooming in on a single line of intricate griever script, "is the override command. It is not a button. It is a vocal lock." Kel stared at her. "A password?" "Far more complex. It is a form of cultural biometrics, an ancient but highly secure griever system. The command phase must be spoken in a specific, formal griever dialect. It requires not just right words, but the right phonetics, the right resonance, the right intent. The vocal structure of a Verdon is different from a human's, but the formal griever language has structural similarities to my own tongue. It is our only chance." "So you can say it?" "I could," she said, a note of raw frustration in her voice as she slapped the arm of her rig. "But I cannot get to the console. Simply recording and repeating isn't enough. You must do it, which means you must learn to speak it.
Me? I can barely order a drink in Galactic Standard. Kel protested, running a hand through his hair. How am I supposed to learn an entire alien language in less than 3 days? You will not learn the language, she said, her eyes gleaming with a fierce, manic light. You will learn the sounds, the individual phonemes. And to do that, we must start with the basics. The most guttural, impactful, and physiological demanding sounds in my language are our curses. They are the building blocks of phonetic power. They are designed to be felt as much as heard. We will start there. She leaned forward in her rig, a terrifyingly enthusiastic teacher. Repeat after me, human. The phrase for "may our entrails be devoured by sandworms" is "klavaktok." The initial sound "krav" comes from the back of the throat, like you're choking on sand yourself. Kel tried, his throat constricted. Pathetic, she snapped. More gravel, more fury. Put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, like the K, then drop it hard, like you genuinely wish my intestines were being consumed by annelids. Again! For the next day and a half, the bunker was filled with the sounds of Kale butchering the Vardon language. Saren drilled him relentlessly, her insults becoming part of the lesson. He had practiced until his throat was raw, sipping reclaimed water that tasted like the pipes it came from. Your glottal stop is weak. Put your soul into it. Imagine you're crushing my windpipe, as I am currently imagining crushing yours. She made a sharp, chopping motion with her hand. No! Your tongue is too high. You sound like a mewling git, not a warrior cursing his nemesis to an eternity of torment. Try again. Feel the air hiss past your teeth. He practiced for hours, pacing the bunker, the curses becoming a strange mantra. He stumbled, he failed, he sounded ridiculous, but slowly, painfully, he started to get it. The harsh, guttural sounds started to feel less foreign in his mouth, the rhythm of the phrases settling into his memory. He was learning to speak her language, one exquisitely violent curse at a time.
It was the night before their assault on the spire. The plan was as solid as it was suicidal. Kel would infiltrate. Saren would be his guide and guardian angel, and he would try not to get his tongue twisted while delivering the most important curse of his life. The green light from outside pulsed, casting long, dancing shadows in the bunker. Kel was at the nutrient dispenser, coaxing it to produce 2 blocks of their last decent rations, a savory protein paste that, if he closed his eyes and concentrated, almost tasted like ramen. The usual tension between them had dissolved into a quiet, shared gravity. She brought a ration block over to her. She took it, her claws scraping lightly against his hand. He sat on a crate near her rig, the silence comfortable now. "What will you do?" he asked softly. "If we make it out of this?" She looked down at the gray nutrient paste, turning it over in her hands. "I do not know," she admitted, her voice stripped of its usual authority, quiet and reflective. "The path I was on is gone. The warrior Saren Var died on that battlefield. I do not know who is left." "Good," Kel said simply. She looked up, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Good?" "Yeah, it means you're not stuck on one path. You can make a new one. Any one you want." He offered her a small, tired smile. "You could be a drill instructor. You've got a real knack for it." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the plates of her jaw, the first he had ever seen. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, her expression held a genuine, unshielded warmth that made his chest feel tight. "You are a strange creature, Kel Riley," she said. Later, as he was cleaning his rifle with meticulous, focused movements, he heard the soft clicks of her personal recorder again. He pretended not to listen, but her whispered words carried across the quiet room. "I have lost count.
Subject: Kel Riley's optimism remains a tactical liability, and yet I find it is not unwelcome. He calls me Rin. I have not yet disemboweled him for it. His plan is reckless. All probability of survival is low. But it is not zero. For the first time since my legs were taken from me, it is not zero. There was a pause. He risked a glance over. She had finished her log. Her rig was powered down for the night to conserve energy, and she was looking at him. "Cale," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Thank you," she said, "for not listening to me." The journey to the spire was a nightmare traverse. The alien landscape had matured, become actively hostile. The spongy ground now crackled with faint bioelectric energy that buzzed through the soles of Cale's boots. Spore-releasing fungi puffed clouds of corrosive dust into the air, forcing his rebreather to work overtime with a strained wheezing sound. Unstable puddles of vicious green fluid bubbled and steamed, smelling of acid. They moved as one. Cal pushed, pulled, and sometimes half-carried Saren's rig over the twisted terrain, his muscles burning with the effort. She, perched in her chair, was his second set of eyes. Her sharp warrior senses picking out dangers he would have missed in the chaotic environment. "Halt!" she commanded, her voice sharp in the calm. "Ground to your left is unstable. I see fissures beneath the fungal mat. Veer right, 20 degrees. He obeyed without question, grunting as he shifted the weight of the rig. They didn't need to talk much. A nod, a hand signal, a grunt of effort. Their trust had been forged in the crucible of the bunker. Now it was being tested in the field. They were a single unit, a strange, four-legged machine and its human engine, moving through a verdant hell of their enemy's making. The base of the spire was guarded. Automated griever drones, sleek insectoid machines, patrolled the entrance with unnerving, fluid economy of motion. They were pinned down behind a cluster of fused glass rock formations that hummed with the spire's energy, making the air around them feel thick and heavy. A plasma bolt ricocheted off the rock above Cale's head, showering him with glowing green shards that sizzled wherever they landed. He raised his rifle, but the view through the scope was a spiderweb of cracked plasteel. The drone's outline was a wavering, useless blur. "Damn it!" he yelled over the whine of the incoming fire. "My scope's gone. Stray shard must have hit it. I'm blind out here." "Then I will be your eyes," Saren said, her voice steel. She scanned the area, her tactical mind processing angles and cover in a fraction of a second. "Cale, that outcrop of rock there, the V-shaped gap, it is solid. Wedge my rig into it. Make it immovable." "What? Ren, what are you planning?" "Do it!" she ordered, her voice leaving no room for refusal. He trusted her. Grunting with effort, he maneuvered the heavy rig into the narrow space she had indicated. The metal of the chair's legs scraped and groaned against the rock, locking it into place. She was completely immobile, a fixed point facing the drone patrol path. She checked the action on her Verdon service rifle, the one she kept holstered to her rig. The click of the magazine seating was sharp and final. "I am a legionnaire of the Verdon Empire," she said, her voice ringing with a purpose he hadn't heard before, a reclamation of her identity. "My purpose is to deliver death." With her lower body stabilized, her upper body was a free-moving turret. The beast was no longer a mobility aid. It was a gunnery platform. She settled the rifle butt against her shoulder plate, her breathing controlled, her movements economical and certain. She fired. The shot was perfect. A drone exploded in a shower of sparks and black metal. She didn't cheer. She didn't pause. She acquired the next target. Her paralysis, the source of her shame,
had become her greatest tactical asset. She was a stationary emplacement, an unshakable point of death in the swirling chaos. Covering fire established, she said calmly into the calm, the crack of her rifle punctuating the words. Another drone fell. "Advance, Corporal. I will clear your path." Awestruck, Kel broke from cover and sprinted for the spire's entrance. Kel slammed the panel and the entrance hissed open. He slipped inside, the sounds of Saren's relentless covering fire fading behind him. He was in. The interior of the spire was a cavernous space filled with the deafening, bone-shaking hum of the core. Green light pulsed from conduits that snaked up the walls like glowing veins. "I'm at the primary console," he said into his comm, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. The air was thick with the smell of charged particles and hot metal, so strong it made his eyes water. He could see the emergency override port, a small, unassuming circle on a massive console. Safeties are disengaged. It's ready for the vocal command. "The phrase is Saren's voice crackled, strained with the effort of the firefight outside. You heard a grunt of pain from her end. "Remember the lessons. Choke on your honor. Curse their very existence." Kel took a deep breath, faced the console's audio receptor, and spoke. A discordant, angry buzz sounded from the console. "Access denied. Damn it," he swore, slamming his fist on the console. "No, you soft-shelled idiot!" Saren yelled over the comm, followed by the sharp crack of her rifle. "You dropped the glottal top on the gawk! Gawk! I told you from the back of your throat, like you're choking on your honor. The Savage was weak! Like you're scolding a child, not damning an empire. Again, do it right!" He took another breath, closing his eyes. He pictured the evac shuttle leaving. He pictured her lying broken on the rock. He channeled all his frustration, his fear, his desperate hope into the sound. He roared, the sound tearing from his raw throat, full of all the fury and defiance he possessed. For a heart-stopping second, there was only the hum of the core. Then, a new sound. A klaxon. Loud, blaring alarms echo through the spire. Red lights strobed, replacing the green glow. I did it!" Kel yelled in triumph. "Rin, I did it!" "I know." Her voice came back tight with pain. "Now get out of there!" As Kel sprinted for the exit, the spire began to shudder violently. The whole structure groaned like a dying beast, shedding metal panels. He burst back into the green-tinged chaos just in time to see a massive support girder shaken loose from the spire's superstructure, slammed down directly onto Saren's position with a deafening crash of metal on rock. "Rin!" He ran to her, his heart hammering against his ribs. The girder had crushed the beast, pinning her rig and her beneath tons of twisted, groaning metal. She was alive. Her upper body free, but she was trapped. The ground shook again. More debris rained down around them. She looked at him, her face calm, serene, even as the world fell apart. "The overload is successful," she said, her voice even. "The mission is complete. This is a good end, Kel." He stared at her, at the crushed metal, at the calm acceptance, and all he felt was white-hot rage. "The hell it is!" He roared, grabbing at the wreckage, his fingers finding no purchase on the hot metal. "We're not done. This is no time," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Go. Save yourself. It is an honorable outcome." "Honor?" He spat, finally getting a grip on a piece of the chair's frame and tearing it loose with a surge of adrenaline. He reached in, fumbled with her harness, and unbuckled it. He scooped her out of the ruined seat and into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, a fragile weight against his chest. We started this together. We're finishing it together. That's the only honor that matters now. He turned and ran. He carried her. Her arms instinctively wrapped around his neck. The spire gave up the ghost behind them. It did not explode. It imploded. A silent, violent collapse. The air itself was stolen from the world, sucked back toward the spire in a gut-wrenching vacuum. Then, the flash. A green-white blindness. The shockwave slammed into them, throwing them to the ground. They landed in a heap in the low, inert alien dust, the sickly green glow of the landscape already fading to a dull gray. Kel lay on his back, gasping for air that no longer tasted of poison. Saren, a warm, solid weight on his chest. They were bruised, battered, and covered in grime, but they were alive. The constant, nerve-shredding hum of the terraformer was gone, replaced by the familiar, welcome whistle of the wind. The silence was beautiful. As they caught their breath, a new light appeared in the sky. Not the angry green of grievers or the dying red of the sun. It was the clean, hard, white light of a coalition ship's landing thrusters. Rescue. The feedback pulse had worked. It had screamed loud enough. For a brief second, they just looked at each other. It was a silent acknowledgement that their private world of two, forged in a bunker at the end of everything, was over. It was a relief, a triumph, and in a strange, small way, a loss. Kel was still holding her. He made no move to put her down. She reached up, her clawed fingers gently, deliberately, touching his dust-streaked face. A slow, genuine smile spread across her features. A sight more brilliant than any star in the sky. "Perhaps," she said, her voice soft and laced with a humor he now knew intimately. "Not all soft shells are idiots." The workshop was the opposite of the bunker. It was clean, brightly lit, and smelled of sterilized metal and conductive gel. Saren stood, her weight supported not by a monstrosity of junk and prayer, but by 2 legs of gleaming chrome and carbon fiber. She took a step, then another. The movements were fluid, silent, with only the faintest whisper of human engineering. Cale leaned against a workbench, a datapad in his hand. His official punishment had been a masterpiece of bureaucratic contradiction, a formal reprimand for gross insubordination placed directly on top of a commendation for initiative and valor. His new assignment was listed as Special Projects Liaison. It was a title so vague it was meaningless. "The articulation is superior," Saren observed, testing the flex of a knee joint. She glanced at him, the corner of her mouth twitching. "But it lacks a certain chaotic charm." "Yeah, well, this one probably won't try to kill you in your sleep," Kel said with a grin. "And the warranty's better." "A minor flaw," she conceded. She walked toward him, her steps now sure and steady, the gait of a warrior rediscovering her stride. "My testimony, combined with the value of the Grieva data, has afforded me certain opportunities. The Coalition is funding a new rapid response unit, small, independent, specializing in unconventional threats." She stopped in front of him, her dark eyes meeting his. "I require a chief engineer, someone with a knack for creative problem-solving." Kel's grin widened. He tossed the datapad onto the workbench. Where do I sign up, Commander?
You may continue to call me Rin,
She said, the words softer than he had ever heard them. She offered her hand, not in thanks or farewell, but as a partner, so long as you promise to keep the music. He took her hand, his callous fingers closing around her own. The Legionnaire and her scrapper. Turns out, the universe had a funny way of promoting you, too.